So what's up, you guys? My name's Cody Steck. I am a real estate investor and a real estate agent, and I love making real estate videos here on YouTube. If this is your first time to the channel, I want to welcome you. We're going to talk about some trick properties that you need to avoid purchasing if you're looking at buying real estate. Number one on our list, we're going to jump right in, is cheap houses. Now, this is something that can be very appealing. It's something that you can look at and say, look, I can buy this house for $50,000, or maybe in your market, a cheap house is $200,000 or it's $300,000 or whatever that number may be, but you need to be careful. You need to know your market and you need to know what those cheap houses are. They're going to be cheap for a reason. One, it could be the location. Two, it could be because it's in really rough shape. Or three, it could be because it's in a weird, funky setup, right? It might be on a busy road. It might be in a trash. It might be totally decimated. There might be some geological issues. I mean, there could be a number of different reasons why it's so cheap. Generally, it comes down to the location, right? It's probably not the best location. Number two, it's probably not the best property. It's probably pretty run down and needs some work, right? So the hard thing with cheap properties is that you really spend so much time and effort getting it fixed up and finding a tenant who's going to take care of it that it's really just not worth your time. I've looked at this before and I thought, hey, I can get this cheap property, but what I found is that with some of my own properties that are on the lower end, it's really hard to keep them maintained and it takes a lot of effort that it's just not worth it, right? You have to factor in your time in this investment and what that actually means for you. So a lot of these cheap houses are not the best investment because one, you're going to have a place that's rough and needs a lot of work. Honestly, it takes a lot more work than you probably expect, and so you're going to spend a ton of time and effort getting it fixed up. And this is really going to cut into your numbers because you're also probably going to find not the best quality tenant, right? Usually the cheapest stuff attracts the cheapest quality tenants. So if you want good tenants, you want something that's a little bit more carefree, you don't want to go after the cheap stuff. You'll also see lower returns and you're also going to see lower appreciation for these types of properties. Overall, I just think that cheap homes are going to be a headache. Spend a little bit more, save up a little bit more, wait a little bit longer to find something that's going to be better. The second trick property that you should try and avoid is old properties. If you've got an old property, it very often needs a lot of work as well. Sometimes with these old properties, you've got old plumbing, you've got old electrical, a foundation that's been there for 150 years. You've got all of these issues that could potentially come up. Now, that's not something that can't be fixed. It's not something that you can't negotiate, or it's not something that you won't be able to find out about on an inspection, but a lot of times it's just not worth it. It becomes so expensive and so cumbersome to go through and fix all these issues that it's oftentimes just not worth your time. Unless you get a screaming deal on this old house, you probably want to avoid those. It's easier to get something that's a little bit newer and already has a lot of the stuff up to code and is going to be a very strong, solid investment for many years to come. The third trick property to avoid is small houses. Oftentimes with small houses, you're gonna have a ton of turnover. If you have a ton of turnover, that means you're gonna spend more time and effort going to the house, flipping it, cleaning it, getting it set up for the next tenant, and having to go through that process. As an investor myself, I can tell you that a lot of the time that I put into my properties is when I have to put a new tenant in there. I self-manage all 11 of my properties, and that's easily the most time that I spend on these properties is when I have to put a new tenant in there. So if you've got a small house, that's great, but then you're gonna have a lot of turnover, right? Because generally somebody looking at a small house is somebody who's just starting out. And so they're going to stay there for a little bit, but then they're going to realize, man, I need a little bit more space, right? They might get married. They might have a kid. They might get a pet. They might have all these things happen to them where they realize they're going to need a little bit more space. And then they're going to want to go and expand and get something a little bit bigger. So you're going to have a ton of turnover if you end up doing this. And I think that's the reason why you need to avoid these small houses. I should also mention that you don't get the scale that you need when you've got these small houses. Again, you can pick up a lot of them, especially if they're cheap, but you're not going to be able to get that economy of scale, and you're going to miss out on some of the appreciation because these smaller homes just don't quite see as much as the general market. And before we jump into the fourth one here, give me a thumbs up on the video if you're enjoying this content so far. I really appreciate it. It helps me out the YouTube algorithm. Fourth property that you need to look out for if you're looking at buying real estate is big houses. You definitely don't want to be the biggest house on the block. You want to be careful about buying the biggest home, just like you want to be careful about buying the smallest home. If you buy the biggest home on the market, you're going to have a smaller demographic of people who are looking for that, and it's going to be so hard to get the value out of your home. Oftentimes, when you buy a big home, you're already paying at the top of the market for that home because it's the biggest one there. And so that doesn't leave you a ton of room to go in and improve the property and push the price even higher. It makes it very difficult to do that because everybody's over here while you're already here at the top of the market. So you don't want to get that even further out by updating the property. And again, just kind of like small houses, you're going to have a smaller demographic of people looking for a big home, right? You're going to find a big family family, you're gonna find just a lot of people who just say, I just don't need that much space, right? Or I'm not gonna pay that much rent just because it's 5,000 square foot home or something, right? So this is something you really wanna avoid. You don't want the biggest house on the block, you don't want the smallest, you don't want the oldest, and you definitely don't want the cheapest. So now that we talked about that, let's talk about some of the properties that you should look for. Well, there's a lot of different properties you could look for, and it really depends on your strategy. To go in line with this video here, the thing I want to talk about is that you should be looking for properties that are kind of in the median, right? Not the biggest, not the smallest, not the oldest, not the newest. You just want something that's maybe a couple of years old, 5, 10, 15 years old, maybe 30 or 40 is fine depending on your market. It really just depends on what's around, but you want to find something that's kind of the middle of the pack. You don't want to stick out. You just want something that's average, that you hopefully can get below market value, put a little bit of money into it, and then increase the value on that property and also increase the rents that you're going to be able to get for that house. So this is really what you're looking for. You want something middle of the pack that's going to be easy to rent, easy to buy, and easy to sell. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I love talking about all things money, stock, and real estate, and I'd love to see you on the next video. With that being said, I'll catch you later.